So it's my pleasure to introduce Dave Hamilton, Tim Geraghty, and Lorenzo to you. You can read about the guys in the notes there. Enough to say that Tim and Lorenzo are vets at Glasgow Vet School, delivering a production medicine consultancy to David. Dave will explain about his farm and his background to you. I've had the privilege to work with these guys now over a number of years, with Dave on a couple of farms, with Lorenzo for about 4 years at Meldrum. And I was really keen to invite them here today to share with you the work they're doing on the monitoring at Dave's farm at Meldrum, because you just had Gordy explain to you about the importance of identifying bottlenecks on a farm. These guys have got it absolutely nailed, so you know, I think there's plenty to learn from what they're going to explain to you. And just really to, before we start, to reiterate my appreciation specifically to Dave, because I know he's more than a little stressed about what he's about to do. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks, Richard. There's some kind words there. I'm the farmer who used to own Cow 28. Before I go into the presentation, I'm just going to mention something about the farm has got a link to the Large Herd Conference. We did some management changes based on coming to the Large Herd Conference in 2010, and I was hoping I'd be here today to tell you about the successes of those changes, but unfortunately they were a near disaster, but we'll come back to that later on. Scotland, the family business, we milk cows in 2 units. I moved to Stirling almost 3 years ago, and the other units down in Dumfries. We've got 600 cows at Meldrum and 300 down in Dumfriesshire. Both very similar. Meldrum's rented, and the other farm is owned. A fairly basic cropping policy. We dropped spring rape last year because the harvest was really a disaster. We were looking at winter wheat yields of 2.3 tonnes when normally it would be 3.5. We grew maize for 10 years, and we realised we couldn't grow it because the last year we actually monitored the yields and we're getting 2.5 tonnes of dry matter, which is unacceptable. So our rations now are heavily based on grass silage and whole crop. We've just changed our milk buyer. We're going to a local dairy, Graham's Dairies. Last year we produced just over 6 million litres at Meldrum. Fairly straightforward, housed all year round. We have been housed at Meldrum all year round for nearly 20 years. There's actually a full wood rotary parlour at this moment in time. Yields pretty much haven't changed much. The important thing in this slide here is our heifer rearing unit. It gets us out of jail later on as things unfold. That was our strength when things didn't go very well. This is the background of Meldrum. That was the steading. It was we went to Meldrum in 85. Our brothers went to Meldrum in 85. It was very much a 60s and 70s steading, 220 cows. They then had a large investment, knocked all the old buildings down, put up this, and it used to have a B&Q building, 425 feet by 150, substantial building, accommodation for 450 cows. That was in 2003, 2004. At this moment in time, we're just knocking down the remaining cubicle shed here and putting up more cubicles for expansion plans, hoping to move to 800 cows in the next couple of years. Farm staff's key to me, obviously. When you get up to biggish numbers of cows, staff become critical. They're looking rather happy there today. Herd manager Doug's been with us 13 years, and assistant Sam's been with us 7 years. We don't do anything really, well, we do self-appraisals every year. I find them quite useful. It gives them their moment to say their bit if they've got any issues. And every 2 months we're all in that office. And if anybody's got any issues, they can raise them there and then rather than letting them rumble on to become something bigger. When I moved to Meldrum, the farm in Dumfriesshire was consistently out-yielding Meldrum by 5 to 6 litres. And there were similar cows. You could argue that the cows at Meldrum were actually better, but 5-6 litres was too much. And it became obvious when I went there that cow comfort played a big part in it. Lorenzo did a locomotion scoring, and they were 35% lame, but a lot of that was down to hock damage. So after being at the Large Herd Conference in 2010, we embarked on going down the deep buried sand cubicles. So with farm labour, we cut all the concrete out, and over a period of 2 months, we installed sand cubicles. The other change we made as well is we started 3 times a day milking in September 2010. So we see we got a gradual milk yield. We got a little dip when we were installing the sand cubicles, because obviously we couldn't move the cows out of the buildings when we were working on the cubicles, so there was a bit of stress. But you can see that after we get the sand cubicles installed, we got a lift. And moving to sand cubicles was actually based on Nigel Cook's presentation at the Large Herd seminar, when he talked about the benefits of moving to sand could be up to $400 per cubicle. So me being me, $400, convert it into pounds, times cows, I'm going to be rich. Or so I thought. But certainly from the early days, things looked good, yields went up, bulling activity was very good because cows were more confident on the concrete, and lameness went down within, was that nearly about a year, the lameness had halved. So things were certainly looking the right direction. Cows looked fantastic, they really did. But we didn't factor in this. After the sand cubicles, the cell counts jumped from just over 250 to 400. I have to say at this point in time that we did have an issue with the milking parlour. The cows had been over milked and we had poor teat-end condition, so that wouldn't be helping our cell counts. But we are where we are, we can't change that. And the mastitis cases nearly trebled. So this was a major concern. It was grabbing all of our attentions. I think at the peak we were actually dumping nearly 1,000 litres of milk. Not a good place to be. And this it hit home that 15% of the cows died or were killed on farm, predominantly from E. coli mastitis. Now, when I mentioned the heifer rearing unit before, this is where the heifer unit helped us out, because we had plenty of heifers coming in, so we managed to keep the numbers up. So although we were losing cows, the milk didn't actually alter too much, because these fresh heifers coming back in. Initially we obviously thought it was the sand, so we embarked on digging the sand out. We went from a soft pit sand to a builder's sand, then on to 5 silica sand, then on to a coarser 5 silica sand. And things got slightly better. We put in quite an aggressive brisket board to keep the cows back, to keep the beds clean, but it really wasn't working. There's too much milk getting wasted, and we were selling too many cows, selling too many good cows, giving a lot of milk because they had high cell counts. We were managing our high cell counts by selling cows, which is not good. Just at that time, gypsum became on the market. And the rep was in one day, and he obviously knew of the woes we were having at Meldrum, and so we'll try out with the gypsum. So gypsum came in, we put it in, and the cell counts dropped by about 50 or 60,000 over the space of 2 or 3 weeks. We did other changes as well. We trained the staff in the better milking routine. At this point in time, we changed the milking parlour over to Westphalia kit. We had better control of the ACRs. We knew they were working properly. Better milk let down. But unfortunately, the gypsum and the sand, well, they just went like concrete. So we're really back to poor cow comfort. So by chance, I came across a product, oat husk, which we could get very readily. So we dug out the gypsum and the sand and we put in the oat husk, and it gave us a very similar comfort to the sand beds. The cows were very comfy, good lying times, and we managed to bring our clinical mastitis cases back down to 30 or 40 per 100 cows. Our mobility scoring stayed pretty good as well. It's actually getting near to 10%. And this morning we sold just over 19,000 litres over 525 cows, and there was 1 cow in treatment for mastitis. So it's been very much a roller coaster ride. Nigel Cook was right in what he said about the sand and the comfort, but obviously sand wasn't going to work for us, and you can see where our cell counts have pulled down to. We're actually down to about 80,000 there before the weather warmed up a little bit. So as I say, it's been very much a roller coaster ride. Thank you very much.
Thank Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for being here. David gave us a nice overview of the farm, and I'm sure that most of you can relate to the issues and the challenges that David has seen the past 4 years. And I can tell you the year 2011 was a hard year for everyone. What I would like to do is to introduce our role in David's farm, so what the Glasgow University, in particular Tim and I, are doing on the weekly basis, on the daily basis in the farm. So just a quick introduction. Most of you can relate to that. That's how our Thursday starts. We start at 7 o'clock in the morning with PDing sessions. We start scanning cows for an hour and a half, and we also validate the body condition score. So the head dairyman body condition score the animals, and we just make sure it's done in a consistent way. And we're going to come back to this point later on. The next hour, we check routinely every fresh cow, every postpartum cow. We do a vagina examination. We take a urine sample to check for ketosis. We ping on the right and on the left for display abomasum. If there are sick cows or surgery to do, we just do it. And that's probably the innovative part. Between 10 and 11, we try to protect an hour for what we call our herd health discussion. And we started that at the end of 2010, beginning of 2011, on the back of the problems that David just discussed around. And as you know, in a dairy, there are always new challenges, always new problems, always new issues to discuss, so we kept it going. So it's been like over 2 years now that we've just been sitting around the table, and we try to preserve this hour every week just to discuss new topics. And here are a list of the main topics that we try to cover on the weekly or on the monthly basis. So from fertility to lameness, milk quality, heifer rearing, infectious disease, nutrition, genetic selection, and calving decision. That's pretty much a sit-down cup of tea session. So after the visit, we gather around the table, cup of tea, and we just discuss. And we try to ask the relevant people that are affecting the job to sit around the table. So David is always sitting around, the head dairyman is sitting around, either me or Tim are around the table. If we're talking about lameness, we would like the foot trimmer to be around. If we're talking about mastitis, we ask the milkers to be around. If we're talking about nutrition, we like the nutrition to come around. And that's how we met Richard. Richard is the nutrition of the farm. Once a month comes up to Meldrum, and we try to coordinate in order to be all around, sitting around the table and discuss. We try to prepare a report in advance, so we discuss the report we prepare in advance. Fertility, as you can see from this bubble graph, is a perfect example of the interlink in a dairy farm. And we all know all these topics that we would like to discuss every time, and we tackle them individually. They're all interlinked together. As Gordy said, it's everything. It's a coordination of everything. And fertility is a typical example of a multifactorial. So heat detection, lameness, mastitis, transition cow disease, nutrition, genetics, semen management, infectious disease, all these aspects are playing a role and are completely interlinked with fertility. And even if we tackle them individually in our herd health discussion, we never forget the multifactorial aspect, and we try to coordinate everything together. To do what we are doing, so because we would like to actually try to find the interlink between all the different aspects, we would like to have everything recorded in the same place. So DairyCom 305 was definitely a great help for us. It's basically mainly for the flexibility of the program and for the data analysis. So we ask our farmers and David in particular to record every information in the same place. So if it's mobility scoring, if it's production, reproduction, or mill records, clinical, subclinical disease, body condition scoring, everything gets recorded in the same place. The other rule that we got is everything we ask our farmers or we ask David to record get utilized. And if it's relevant, gets feedback to the farmer and it gets discussed around the table. So that's, you go an example here of two reports of a mastitis discussion and a body condition score discussion. So everything, that's a format of our reports. That's what we discussed around the table, and that's what we feedback to the farmer. Well, what I would like to introduce you is what we call the magic herd health cycle. Every topic of our discussion takes into consideration the herd health cycle. So we always start with monitoring the performance. Once we monitor the performance, we compare to set targets. If the targets are not achieved, we try to understand the shortfalls. Then we implement controls, and then we're back to monitoring the performance, and the herd health cycle restarts again. And Fertility is the perfect example. So we're just going to give an example. We start always with monitoring the performance, and when we talk about fertility, what are the performance you want to monitor? And it's pretty straightforward. In the UK, we still like to subdivide in submission rate and conception rate. So how well do you serve your cows, or how well do you, or the old Geraghty and Americans, they just summarize that in preg rate. And it's just a combination of serving and holding. So it doesn't matter if you would like to split them up between submission rate and conception rate, or if you want to just talk about pregnancy rate. But that's the way to define your fertility records. It's the most actual, up-to-date way to look at the fertility. So here we go. So we go to monitoring the performance in place. We know what we want to monitor, and so we compare to our set targets. And as you can see, the farm has got a submission rate of 52%, a conception rate of 40%, and an overall pregnancy rate of 20%. And you can compare to the set targets we fit in a year ago. And pretty straightforward, you can see that the farm has got probably a suboptimal submission rate. So once we understand our problems, we try to understand our shortfalls. And that's how the bubble graph that I just showed you comes quite handy, because we said that fertility is a multifactorial aspect, and it's got all these different topics that are interrelated with fertility. So we try to understand how every factor plays a role into this aspect, and we calculated for Davids, and we know that a lame cow has got an average laying cow in David's farm has got an overall decrease of submission rate by 13%, and we're moving around the clock of the bubble graph. A mastitic cows has got a reduced conception rate by 9%, and we also calculated the effect of transition cow disease. So a cow that had any transition cow disease, so retained fetal member, metritis, ketosis, LDA, has got an overall reduced pregnancy rate by 5%. So the situation becomes quite interesting, and because Richard is coming around, we were more and more interested in the nutritional aspect. So we said, how does nutrition affect fertility? And we all know that nutrition plays a massive role on the fertility aspect. So because nutrition is one of the topics we discuss individually in one of our weekly discussions, we go also monitoring performance in place for nutrition, so we follow the same herd health cycle. And that's how we monitor on our side the nutrition. So we take blood sample pre and postpartum, and we look for ketosis, ketone bodies and NIFAs, and that's done on the monthly or on the 2-monthly basis. We look at the milk solids, so the fat protein ration, without over-interpreting the data, but we look at them every month, and we calculate the incidence of postpartum disease. So retained fetal member, metritis, ketosis, LDAs, we calculate them over a year, and we monitor them. The fourth thing we do, and it's probably quite the innovative part, is we give lots of importance to the body condition score, and in particular, we want to consider the body condition score changes. So we're not interested to walk in a farm and just do one-off body condition. We want to follow a single animal, an individual animal, throughout her entire production cycle. And that's what we ask our farmers to do. We would like to record the body condition at calving, at 30 days in milk, at 60 days in milk, at time of the second PD, so when she rechecked pregnant, a dry off, and a close up. And if we look at this graph a second, that's what we call our green cow. So a cow that enters the dry period with a normal, a target body condition score around 3. She doesn't lose body condition during a dry period. She calves down, and as most of the dairy cows, she loses a bit of condition in her lactation. She gets pregnant quite quickly, and then she enters her dry period, regaining that condition she lost, and she's back again. If you compare our green cow to our red cow, that's a cow that enters the dry period over condition. She starts losing a bit of condition already during the dry period. The body condition score loss is even more severe in the early lactation. This cow is probably going to take longer to get back in calf, and then by the time it's dry, it's again over condition, and the cycle restarts again. So we actually calculate the effect of the body condition score loss and the body condition score change in David's farm, and it's got an effect reducing the submission rate by 10%. So there is a massive effect of the body condition score. At this point, probably you would like me to tell you the control we implemented, and unfortunately, there is no shortcut to tell you how you're going to increase your submission rate and your conception rate straight away. Because if you remember your bubble graph, there are lots and lots of factors. Fertility is multifactorial, so there are lots and lots of factors influencing fertility. So the only way to get your fertility performance better is to tackle the individual bubble that we discussed, the mastitis, the lameness, the transition cow disease, and the nutrition. So That's a quick example how we monitor some of the aspects. And as we said at the beginning, dairy farmers go challenges and issues every day, and that's the new problem that we've been facing at the beginning of 2013. So we're back to the transition cow disease, and we're monitoring, as we said, the incidence over time. And if we concentrate a second on the red bar, you can see that it tells you the incidence of ketosis. And we were fluctuating around 10%, so we're taking urine samples, so we're not too worried. But look what happened in the beginning of the year. We had a massive spike of ketosis, where 1 in 3 animals in the farm were showing up purple on our urine stick, so we're ketotic, and it continued on the next month. If we look at the blue line, you can see that the farm managed not to have any display. The blue line tells you the displaced abomasum, and the farm managed to have no displaced abomasum for more than 6 months. And more or less at the same time that we had the spike of ketosis, the displaced abomasum restarted again. And here is that's the start of the sad story that Tim is going to tell you about, because we actually had a dead cow at the beginning of January. So thank you very much. I'll let Tim tell you the rest of the story.
That's great. Thanks a million. It's really wonderful to stand up and talk and tell this story. It's funny because we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things Gordy was saying, and our views aren't the same, and so we're going to have conflict, but it will be nice to discuss it openly, and it'll be interesting to hear everyone's views. It's also funny to zone in on a single cow at the large herd conference, because we're kind of talking, 300 cows plus. But it came about because we did this on a Thursday. Richard was up, we had a dead cow, we had a post-mortem, so we used it as a little anecdote. It wasn't really about the single cow, it was an indicator for a herd problem, we felt. Anyway, this is her story. She calved bang on target, 23 months of age in 2010. She was back in calve after 102 days, which for us was bang on target also. And we dried her off after 350 days, taking us into 2011. Calved for the second time, and this time took a lot longer to get back in calve, 185, 86 days. So she just sneaked in before her cut-off. We stopped breeding at about 200. So she had about 2 weeks to go, and she would have had a change in career, but she made it back in the dairy. And then, because of this, she had a longer lactation, of course, so 423-day lactation. We're getting towards the end of her story, as we can see. Calved again, third lactation starting, but held her cleanings, didn't do well, down in the fresh pen, and we lost her 5 days later. So that's the sad story. Cow 28 dies. Because of the monitoring, Lorenzo touched on it, we had a bit more information from the tail end of her career. So she dried off at body condition 3.5. when she entered the dry pen, and she calved down at body condition 3 1/4. It's funny talking about body condition without a cow next to us, because we kind of need to look. It's very subjective, but there was some indication she might have lost weight in the dry period. We also had a blood result. We happened to be unlucky that we were sampling that week. So the week before she calved, we knew that her ketone and her NEFA were elevated the week before she calved, and she died. This is the image, one of the images from their post-mortem. It's her liver, cow 28's liver. And if you're not used to looking at livers, I'm not a pathologist, but there's a few problems here. The first is it's massively swollen, it's enlarged. The edge is rounded. You can see that the edge on the left side is starting to bulge around. It's also very pale, so it's not a healthy liver. And all of those changes may be more clear on the cut surface. All of those changes are consistent with a massive amount of fat landing in this cow's liver. The pathologist concluded in their report at Glasgow, this cow died of a fatty liver, and we agreed. And it's not hard to see where the problem was. Failure. So what do? We're academics, right? So we go back to the textbook, we build out the dusty textbook, and we go, oh shit, what's fatty liver again? Let's look it up. And my understanding, this is horribly simplified, and probably, I think it's helpful. The cow's eating too much, right? She's got more energy intake than she's producing in milk, and she responds to that by putting fat down around her body. And we can palpate that fat in 3 places: the tail head, the short ribs, and the long ribs. And the longer it goes on, the more fat she lays down. And so far as I understand it, then when she comes close to calving, she's carrying all this fat, and her dry matter intake drops compared to a cow carrying less fat. So now we have a dangerous cow, because she's got all this fat on her back, and she's not at the feed face as often. and her energy requirements around calving, of course, are going to change big time. So that means that she starts mobilising some of this fat. She's not eating enough, she mobilises some of that fat, and it's the liver's job to change that into something she can use, change it to glucose. So the fat comes from the back, hits the liver, and en route we can measure it as NEFA. And if the NEFA goes up, we know that there's more fat moving from her back to her liver. Eventually the liver starts to kind of struggle with this if too much arrives, and a coping mechanism, let's make ketone instead. So when the ketones go up, you know her liver's in trouble. So we knew from our blood samples this cow, a week before she calved, had fat coming from her back to her liver, and her liver was kind of struggling with that. Sad story, eventually the liver just gives up altogether. We get massive fat and influx and liver failure and death. So that was our sad story. The single cow, it wasn't about the single cow, of course, it was a herd problem. Lorenzo showed us the graph. We knew ketosis had spiked. We had LDAs for the first time, which delays our tea break. We had dead cows, bloody hell. Okay, we lost several similarly. So we're monitoring performance, but you don't need to monitor much. When there's cows dead in the fresh cow pen, there's a problem. Short term, this is the first funny bit. So we're sitting down and we're going, what do we do? And the first thing we did, as Gordy kind of predicted yesterday, we said we need to put more energy in the dry cow diet. We need to give them some more because of this issue. So we agreed to do that. We increased the energy density. We started kind of difficult management tools. We said, let's target propylene glycol. Let's pick out fat dry cows in the dry cow pen and see a week before they calve, we'll get propylene down their throats. It's back in January, right, so we weren't talking about Monensin boluses, etc. It would have been at the table had they been available at the time, but they weren't. So that was the short-term response, but in the mid-term, we were trying to do the upstream thing. How do we stop this problem actually occurring in the first place? And we had a few ideas were getting bounced around. One was a weight loss group, so you dry the fat cow off and you stick her in a pen and you try and knock some condition off her. It wasn't really popular because it was an extra pen of cows, an extra ration, an extra hassle. We talked about splitting the ration. We said, well, maybe our mids and late lactation cows don't need all this energy. Maybe we can do a 2-ration system. And again, it wasn't popular because our cows are doing 36, 37 litres. The ration is working well from a production perspective. Single ration, one mix, one thing for the whole shed. There was a lot of things going for this ration, but we were talking about it. So instead we said, well, listen, we need to understand this a bit better before we make one of these bigger decisions. Let's go back around our cycle and look at the understanding of the problem. So this is where we pulled our records together, 5 minutes. So we've too many fat cows in the dry pen, right? The red cow means very fat, 3.75 plus. Way too many, a third of our cows going in, less than half going in on target. The general trend was cows are losing weight, so you either hold weight or you lose weight in the dry cow pen on this herd. So we started asking questions. We said, is it the fat cows that lose weight? That was the first question. Do the cows that start fat, are they the ones that lose weight? And the answer we felt by this graph was probably yes. The fat cows are on the far right-hand side. 2/3 of them are losing weight. The cows that come in on target, less than a third of them lose weight. So we said, well, generally, yeah, that would be consistent with our textbook view on this problem. Do fat cows suffer the ketosis, the transition cow disease? And again, it was a resounding yes. The fat cows are the red bar on the right, and they had more than double the risk of a transition cow disease in our herd than the cows that dried off on target. So we put it together, whether the cows that lose weight in the dry period, do they suffer more? And we'll move quickly because it's the same, but yes, there was an increased risk if you lost weight in the dry period. So all our attention then flicks onto this fat cow. Why is this cow fat when we dry her off? We wanted to answer that. Which cows are fat? And we found two things we felt were explanatory. The first was she didn't need to be a heifer. If you were a first lactation cow on the left, about 25% are coming in fat. If you're 2, 3 or 4, then you were coming in at 50% fat, okay? So the older cows are coming in fat on our herd. The heifer's kind of protected. Maybe she's still growing, more energy requirement, who knows? But the older cows are coming in fat. The second big thing we felt was the 305-day yield. So we've divided the herd into quarters. The lowest yielding 25% are on the left, and more than 60% were entering our dry period fat. The highest yielding at the far end are down at the 30% mark, okay? So it's a lovely trend, isn't it? It looks like it was consistent with what, so if you make less milk, you put on more fat in this herd, was our conclusion. We looked at length of lactation. You've got the graph in your thing. I've taken it out for time. Have a look yourselves. It wasn't consistent. It didn't look great. It wasn't cows milking for ages. It was a yield issue. So we went another step. We said, well, does low genetic merit for milk production lead to low milk production? We wanted to answer that. So is it a genetic thing? And it's funny, you know, Gory, never a bottleneck, but here we are. Every cow gets a blue dot, and the genetic merit for milk production is across the way, and the actual milk production is up and down the way. And there's our correlation. I didn't put on the equation. The slope's around 5, which means for every 1 increase in PTA milk, we get another 5 litres over 305 days. The R-square is about 30, which means we're explaining about 30% of the variation by looking at this one variable. Fair enough. So in our heads we were saying, well, yes, genetic merit for milk production is linked to actual milk production. So we completed the story. Does low genetic merit cows, do they get fat in or dry before they dry off? And here's the chart, maybe less numbers, maybe a bit less impressive, but same trend. The lowest quartile on the far left, 50% are coming in fat. This isn't observed milk, this is genetic potential for milk measured through PTA. 50% fat, barely 25% getting target, compared to 50% target in the other groups. So where did we go? We said, okay, what's the problem? Fat cows have the greatest risk. The cows that get fat are low yielding 2+ lactation, and cows with the lowest genetic merit are those that are going to be low yielding. So we went back to our table. This is accelerated, right? We took several weeks. Richard was there a couple times, and we had these 2 ideas, and we threw both of them out. We didn't change either. This is what we've done on the back of our little think. We started saying, let's get rid of these low genetic merit cows. These low yielding cows do not fit our system well. So we need to start moving them on faster, beef them faster. So we do this voluntary cull forecast whereby we look at number of heifers calving, expected death rate, number of pregnancies, how many spare do we have in this unit. We need to choose the right animal, all right? So it doesn't matter if you're culling an extra animal, you need to choose the right one to cull. So we now put genetic merit much higher on the cull list. If you're a low genetic merit or a low yielding cow, you're up the list a bit, along with mastitis and lameness and whatever else. Our breeding protocols become flexible, so we vary when we stop breeding our cows. If you're a low genetic merit cow in our herd, it's quite likely you'll stop breeding in the dry period. We calve you down and we say, no, I'm sorry, you're not getting bred in our herd, you don't fit. If you're a heifer, you'll get 250 days now instead of 200 days because we think they're less risky. This is a good one for me. I never really get into the bull thing. I'm not a man to sit with a bull catalogue, but we've started doing it. It's a long way in your head from the cow that's held or cleaning in the transition pen to saying to the guy, hey, can I come and talk to your AI, you know, your salesman, and let's look at the bulls. But it's the obvious other place, you know, on genetics, if we believe the story. And this is my last slide, I'm just on time, for the future. We're now really interested in this idea of genomic testing some of our heifers. If we, in the future, perceive we've got surplus heifers, and we want to increase the trade-in value by selling a fresh-calved heifer as opposed to a beef cow, then we want to sell the correct heifer. And I think that this increased reliability of genetic knowledge, you know, through genomics might be the way for that. So I don't know, it was just thrown out there. We're not doing it yet, but we're considering it as part of the same problem, really. That's us. Thank you very much.
I know. I'm just very pleased that Tim and I seem to still be getting on with each other, because after 5 minutes it got down to 2 minutes and then 1 minute. I'm not quite sure what he was thinking I was saying to him. But anyway, thank you very much indeed, Tim. Is there a quick question? Warwick's got a microphone there, either for Tim, Lorenzo or David.
Hi guys, thank you very much for that. It's some very interesting points you've raised. Just wondered, could you actually explain why we got the spike in fresh cow health going tits up effectively? You explained a lot of it is to do with the cows being dry, but why the spike all of a sudden in those couple of months? Because surely it's a long-term issue.
So why the spike? Who would like to pick that up? There's a heck of a discussion as to who's going to answer that. Is it you, Tim? Okay.
It's a great question, and we didn't really answer it, and you're quite right in your point. David and Richard, we had a quick discussion ourselves. Forage changes was probably the thing that we were looking at. So we do have an inconsistent ration. The ration inevitably changes as we change forage, and we assume that was probably it. I don't know if David wants to expand beyond that, or Richard.
It was, poorer quality forages from last year, and I think the analysis were shocking. So you're putting them through at exactly the same, maintaining exactly the same ration that's been working very well through the summer. You get your NIR analysis back, you keep that same formulation that's been working very well for us, and then your monitoring kicks off, and obviously in hindsight it's gone very wrong. Then with further wet chemistry analysis of that forage, obviously on the inquest, you can see that the ration energy density had dropped a long way, and obviously just tipped them over the edge. So in hindsight's a wonderful thing, and it's probably a consequence of last year's horrendous summer that we came to live with through the dry case.